Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and in my last video I was getting a little bit frustrated with my UI, specifically how it felt blocking my field of view, especially on the left side of my character, which was definitely a big problem with the seasonal affix Prideful, where someone could basically sneak up to me on my left side, I wouldn't see them, and then they would hit me with that directional arrow effect, and I'd really struggle to react in time if I couldn't see them behind my nameplates. And there was also some issues I had with enemy nameplates and correctly targeting the enemy unit and seeing what they're casting, what their spells they were casting, or what health percentage they were at, for instance, and some other small various issues. So in this video, I want to work through optimizing my UI and talking through what my goals for the UI are and showing kind of how I set up my add-ons to achieve those goals. So one of the inspirations for this video was some of the UIs that I saw while watching the Race to World First over the past few weeks. The top players in the world obviously have to have very good UIs in order to play at such a high level, and I specifically liked what I saw out of Mavie, the healer in Complexity Limit, and how he had his UI set up. So here's the example of his UI, and you can see he has a very wide field of view, almost nothing large or solid on the left or right of his character, easily allowing him to see all of his surroundings. And the only thing really in the top half of the screen is the boss ability timers and other mechanical information. He has his raid frames at the bottom of the screen, and no action bars at all, just some weak auras or other add-ons here to track the cooldowns of specific abilities. And he also has a list of the raid-wide cooldowns down there as well, like Healing Tide Totem or Devotion Aura, tracked right next to his raid frame. And that's something that's really vitally important for healers like Mavie to keep an eye on. Not so much for DPS, but it could be useful to have that on my UI as well if I can find the space for it. So let's see if we can incorporate some of these aspects into my own UI. First, let's talk about action bars. Now, I've always had action bars shown on my screen. I would often swap key bindings or maybe need to put something like a trinket or new macros on my bar. And I also use them to track the cooldown cooldowns of spells that were not like kind of my core rotational spells, but still important to know about things like Blink or Ice Block and Frost Nova, kind of like utility spells. I'd also use them to manually click on abilities that I would rarely use or would only use at specific times. Things like Arcane Intellect before combat, Time Warp, my combat potion as well, that I use at predetermined times in encounters. Keeping those off keybinds was nice to prevent me from ever accidentally clicking them at the wrong time. But since space is going to be at a premium, I think I can afford to get rid of most of these action bars that are down here at the bottom with all of my core damage and rotational abilities, and just maybe add a second bar here off to the right by my kind of non-combat abilities to add those abilities that I'm going to manually click. This bar over here I'll keep because it has mostly out-of-combat stuff and it's pretty far out of the way. It's not really obscuring my view. It's got things like my Auction House Mount, flasks, food buffs, portal spells, things that I'm going to click outside of combat that I don't need to have a specific keybind for because it's not really like a time pressure for me to click those at any point. So to do that, I'm going to go into Bartender 4. It's my Bartend add-on. And I'm going to make a new profile. So we'll just call the new profile Hidden Bars. And so it's going to default all the bars to kind of like the Blizzard standard here. But what we can do is we can copy from default, which is what I modified. So it looks exactly like what I currently have. But now I can modify this and be able to freely swap between this version and the old version in case I want to go back to it for whatever reason. So here we're going to unlock the bars so that we can see where everything's at. And we can see we've got bar 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. But actually the ones we want to hide here are going to be bars 1, 4, 5, and 6. I don't really know how the bar ordering got all messed up, but regardless. So we're just going to disable bar 1. Oh, not bar 3. We want to keep bar 3. 4, 5, and 6. And don't know where bar 2 is. It's currently not enabled, so we're just going to use that one as the one over here. So we click and enable, and it shows up like this. And I've actually I've been messing around with this for a little bit, so I already have the abilities that I want to keep on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to move it from 1 row up to 12, so it kind of makes it a column instead of a row, and put it over right here next to my other bar. It's a little bit shorter right here because it has this padding thing, just how much space is in between each button. Just to make it consistent, bar 3 has a padding of 5, and so we're going to make this also have a padding of 5. So it'll be the same length and a little bit of gap in between each of the buttons. So now once we've done all that, we can lock the bars and close it all. And you can see now we've got a lot more real estate kind of freed up down here. And I can still kind of manually click my Arcane Intellect or whatever else. And of course, all my buttons still work. I can still cast my spells just the same. So now this frees up some space that we can kind of move our raid frames and party frames down to the bottom, and our player frame, and kind of adjust so that we get a little bit more real estate here on the left side of the screen. The other thing down here is I've got these like stat numbers down here, the crit, haste, mastery, and burst percentage. That's through a weak aura that I use just to track that, and it also just helps if somebody's watching the stream just to kind of know what my general stats are. And but it's not something that I like look at during combat, and doesn't need to be down there where I want to put raid frame information, but I'd still kind of like to keep it on screen. So I'm going to type /WA for weak auras, and it's this stats weak aura. So I'm just going to pick that up and move it. I'm not sure. I'm going to move it over here for the moment, just kind of out of the way, off to the right here, where you know, kind of less valuable real estate. And I'm actually going to move it right up here because I've got a cast timeline here as well. So the next thing I want to do is mess around with my unit frames to get them in the right position. So I'm going to type /SUF to bring up shadowed unit frames. That's the unit frame add-on that I use and really like. And we're going to do the same thing where we make a new profile. We're going to call it hidden bars just to be consistent. And we're going to copy from default just because that is what I used before, so that we can freely switch back between hidden bars and the default one. Now, there's a little bit of a weird bug here with shadowed unit frames. Anytime you kind of modify these, it like hides the whole UI. I think that's like a temporary bug that hopefully is going to get patched in an update, because this hasn't happened until I just started trying to record this video. So like if I click unlock frames to start moving things around, it just hides my whole UI. And that's pretty annoying, but I can press Alt-Z twice to bring it back. That kind of naturally hides the UI and then kind of reloads it or re-displays it. And you can move things around here. So this looks like a mess because it shows every one of the frames where they could be, and then every possible buff that could be on them or it could be displayed. So it's a little bit of an overload, but you can still move things around here when it's unlocked. So I'm going to move the raid frames from over here on the left. We're going to move them down here. And the one thing I want to say about the raid frames, though, is I've got them set where like row 1 is at the top, and then row 1 at the top is group 1, and then group 2, and then group 3 all the way down. And that'll work great if I've got exactly 4 groups for like a mythic raid where you have exactly 4 groups and 20 people. But if you do heroic raids and you have like 30 people, or maybe like epic battlegrounds and you need to have more than four groups, then that can be a little bit of a problem if you put them down here in that same orientation, because it's going to overflow to the bottom of the screen. So I might look into changing them to be maybe like row 1 on the left, and then row 2, 3, and kind of like left to right rather than top to bottom, just so that it can overflow a little bit off to the right here if we have more groups than that. So I'm going to move this down here and play around with that. And then we're also going to move our party frames. They want to be down here too, but we're going to have to make them horizontally aligned. Similarly, I want to move the player and target profiles. We're going to move them down a little bit just because they were also kind of obscuring the view a little bit. I'm not sure exactly where I want to put them, so let's just move them down here temporarily while I sort out the rest of the party frames. So since there's a little bit of an issue with the add-on, every time I make a modification, it'll like hide my UI and gotta like manually redo it. I am going to just do this, not record it, and just kind of cut to the end product and kind of explain you know, what I did and how we got there. Okay, after a little bit of finagling here, I've got a setup that I think I'm going to be pretty happy with. I've got my player frame down close to the bottom, and my raid frames are directly underneath it. And they're going to be growing from left to right, as I mentioned before. We've got like group 1 in the leftmost column, group 2 in a column right next to it, all the way up to potentially group 8 kind of right over here. I also have my party frames if I'm just in a 5-man party that are going to be displayed horizontally underneath my character from left to right, including my player here, so it'll be kind of just underneath the player and the target frames. So this really opens up the top field of view here, left and right, and specifically, I'm not entirely sure what I want to do with the boss frames. This is just like whenever there's you know, multiple targets on the boss, like say a council boss, then all 3 of their names will be displayed here, so I can quickly target in between them. I think I kind of like the positioning on this just because that's kind of where I'm naturally looking for targeting things anyway. So like if I'm going to click on a different name frame, it's going to be, my cursor is going to be kind of up here in the top third of my screen. So it makes some sense to leave this up here, although I might finagle with the exact positioning at some point once I get a little bit of experience with this UI in an actual raid environment, hopefully tonight. The next thing I want to do is lock frames here so it clears up all this mess, and I can just see what the default is. And I want to move my weak auras, so the things I was tracking all of my abilities, and I think right now they're still kind of, oops, that was the wrong one. Right now all the weak auras are still here off to the left in my mages one, so it's kind of showing here off to the left, kind of around where my old nameplate used to be. So I'd like to move that, kind of move them all here into the middle and possibly readjust the sizes on them. So luckily, since they're all in one group, I can just kind of click and drag the entire group and shift them. Now it's going to mess up some things, like for my Frost Mage, the Fingers of Frost and Brain Freeze are kind of in the wrong spot now, but I can handle that on a case-by-case basis. Just generally would like these to be, you know, roughly here. So it'll be like kind of to the right of my nameplate. And then I'm going to go into each one of these individually and kind of readjust them, and also make new weak auras for the abilities that I used to just track manually on my action bars, things like Ice Block, Blink, or Shimmer, or other abilities that have like a cooldown that I don't need it like for every single rotation, but it's good to know what the cooldown is just to have that available. Things like utility spells as well. So I'm going to go through and make weak auras for those, and we'll see how it all gets set up in the end. So to make the weak auras here, I'm going to go to new aura and then click icon, and then we get this blank icon with just a question mark icon. And what we want to do is, of course, rename it to whatever we want to be tracking. So I'm going to make one for mirror images right now. And to track that, we're going to go into the trigger tab, and we're going to look for, instead of an aura, we're going to look for a status. And it's going to be on this big drop down, all the different kinds of statuses. It's going to be cooldown progress spell. And then we type in the spell name here, so that would be mirror images, or mirror image. I guess that's just one mirror image, and it'll show the icon right there. So then we're going to click and drag it into the right spot. So I've just been making them right here, and I've been resizing them down to how big did I want that? I think it was 40 by 40. Is a smaller size than the other ones I used, but since these are a little bit less used, we're gonna just make them about this size, and then you can use these little fine adjustment tools to get it in just the right spot. And then once I've made this one, we are going to click the show cooldown, and then so it'll show the cooldown text on it. And then we just make sure that it loads at the right time. So I kind of want this loaded all the time, just so I know going into a pool if I have it available, instead of just in combat. Player class obviously just for mages and for all talent specs, so we don't need to do anything else there. Once we have that though, I can just kind of copy and paste this by just right clicking duplicate, and then just changing that trigger for all of the other ones. That's actually what I did already for things like Dragon's Breath, Blazing Barrier, and then just readjusting the positioning on them so that we can see them all right here. So after getting all of the weak auras set up, I realized that my action bars weren't working, like my spells just weren't casting, and so I made a little bit of a mistake with the bartender. I disabled the bars, but a better way to handle that, instead of disabling it, is to go into visibility and then just always hide it. So I always hide bar 1, and or the other ones, bar 1, 5, 1, 4, 5, and 6 is ones that we want to just have that always hidden, 1, 4, 5, and 6. So we always hide those, and then when we lock it, they should disappear, but it should still be functional. So now that all those bars are hidden, we can go into testing on a training dummy here, and all of our abilities still work. We can do our normal rotation, and our abilities are tracked here, like the utility abilities, and my main rotational weak auras are still doing just fine. And I have so much more room to see on the left and right of me. So I really like this. I do want to move this little combat timer here. That's a weak aura that keeps track of the time in combat. Probably move that over here to the right along with the stats, the stat weights. And we're going to take this into a dungeon or a LFR raid just to see how the rest of it pans out. So I got into a looking for raid here just to test out the UI here. We're going to be facing up against Huntsman Altimore, and just want to see where everything lines up. One thing I will say that I have the weak auras that show like my kind of out of combat utility, or like my utility spells. Those are always showing, so I always know the cooldown on my Shimmer, my Blazing Barrier. But something like combustion, I can't see that without looking at my my weak auras. So if that's only showing in combat, I can't actually see the cooldown remaining on that. So I probably want to enable that at all times. But for this fight, I'm kind of like how this UI is currently working. I can see pretty much everything on my left and right a whole lot better than I could before. Even if my, rotationally I'm not playing all the, as great as I could be. This guy's just not gonna. Okay, there we go. They actually are going into soak. I don't like where some of the boss timers are. You can see there's the boss timers really overlapping with like my target icon here, and that's through my Bigwigs icon or Bigwigs add-on. So I think after this fight we'll go and adjust that positioning, maybe move them up to somewhere else so that I can see them a little bit better. And also this text is showing up right in my my weak auras, and so that's not ideal either. So I need to find a way to get rid of just to move that the text on me from my boss mod's Bigwigs. But other than that, I do like the visibility that it's offering a little bit better. I do have a big gap down here by the raid frames. It is organized such that group 1 here is on the left, group 2 is right next to it. I'm not playing that optimally, it's just looking for raid. And group 3, so there's this big gap here if you're just running with 4 or even 5 groups. So I think there's gotta be a way to kind of utilize the space on the right here, maybe move the raid frames over or something along those lines. I'll play around with that here after this raid. Continuing on in this LFR, I've made some adjustments here. I've moved the raid frames over to the right a little bit and enabled my ERT, Exorcist raid tools for the raid cooldowns, so I can see kind of big raid cooldowns, things like Lay on Hands, Tranquility, or other kinds of big raid cooldowns that I need to be aware of over here on the left. And so if I do get up to like 8 groups, which I think is the maximum, 40 people in the raid, then the people might start, or the raid frames might start overlapping with damage meters. But if that becomes a common occurrence, which it really isn't, then I can make some adjustments at that time. But I think for right now, having it organized like this is probably pretty good. I've got, I use up a lot of the real estate down here, so it's nothing feels like it's wasted. I will say that it feels a little bit close between like the raid frames here, the raid profiles, and like my weak auras of my abilities. It feels a little bit cluttered right there. Maybe that's just something that I need to get used to, or just like more practice with, just to be able to quickly distinguish, okay, that's the raid profile, this is something I need to care about rotationally. I think that's something I'll just get used to over time here. I've also readjusted the positioning of the boss timers so that everything is kind of off on the right. All the text and all the timers are going to be over here on the right. As you can see, the pull timer and everything. And so we'll have things like the objectives and stuff, we'll have that hidden.
2, 1.
So as we get into combat here, start with a Pyroblast, or start with a combustion rotation, and yeah, things are looking pretty good. I still keep my combustion is like active, this little icon right here where my cursor is, just so that I can see, yeah, I can keep track of the time left on combustion. That's the only thing that I kind of have above where my cast bar is. I might make some adjustments. The one thing that I still see that I would like to know about is some kind of indication of the global cooldown. Obviously, if I'm casting a spell, I need to know exactly when the next global cooldown will come up, especially if I have like higher haste or some ability that I'm not quite, that I don't have it like muscle memory into. So maybe I can see if I can add that to some of the weak auras here, just like with the Dragon's Breath, it would just show me like a quick little spin of the global cooldown. That would help. Normally I would look at the old action bars for that kind of information, but that's not a thing in this UI. So some small adjustments here, but overall I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. I'll still have to do the same kind of testing for a party in a mythic dungeon or something, just to make sure the party UI is set up properly. But overall, I think this is looking pretty decent at the moment. Alright, so now I'm in a dungeon to test this out, doing some of the Wrath of the Lich King time walking. That's the special event for this week. And in here, the one thing I notice immediately with the party frames is that on the right-hand side here, if my target, the buffs and debuffs, a little bit overlap with one of the members of the party, so that's not ideal. So I can probably afford to move the party frames down a little bit, down further on the screen, and that'll give me a little bit more room to see what's going on with my target. Maybe that's the same with the raid frames. The main thing I wanted to look at in the party, though, is kind of enemy nameplates. That was one of my big problems, was like them overlapping a little bit too much and being unable to see the health and cast abilities of somebody if there's like a big stack of enemies. So there's obviously not a big stack right here, so I don't need to worry about when there's just 2 targets. So hopefully we get a bigger pull up here in the next room, and I can see how my nameplate add-on's working, and then maybe go and make some adjustments of that. So like when we have 3 targets, not that bad actually. I can still kind of see, but you see when this highlights, you see like the ignite and the flame strike debuff, it really obscures the health total of the target behind it. So what I could do is take those icons, like the buffs and debuffs that are on them, and just like make those a smaller size. Maybe that would help that out, so I could see what's behind it a little bit better, and maybe see how my target gets bolded, it gets like increased in size. Maybe if I make it so it doesn't get bolded quite as much, that would also help. So we'll try that out and see how that might improve my dungeon UI at the very least. We are out of the dungeon now, and want to make the adjustments in my nameplates that we mentioned. So let's type /plater to bring up a plater. That's my nameplate add-on. And the first thing I want to do is change the target size, because that's a little bit too big. It like emphasizes it too big. So when I click on a target here, you see how much bigger that nameplate gets. That's a little bit too much. So under target, we're going to go to target scale and drop that down. It was at 1.2. Let's drop down to 1.1. The recommended number is 1.15, but I'd like to take it a little bit smaller than that just because I have been having issues. So you can see it's it's still bigger, but not quite as big as it was before. The other thing is under buff settings. I don't want the buffs to be quite as big, because that's a big part of obscuring the target behind it, as you can see in this example here. So what we're going to do is in the aura size, it's at 22 and 15. Let's take that down to, I don't know, 19, 12, something like that. Oops, not 74. 19 and 12. So that should hopefully fix it up a little bit here. You can see, even though I'm clicking on it and get the buffs, it doesn't obscure the other ones quite as much. It's a little bit harder to see the exact icon of like, oh, what is that debuff? But that might just be something that I'll play around with and see if that becomes an issue. But those are the knobs I can turn to try to fix that. So overall, I think I'm really liking how this UI has turned out. It's quite clean. I can see my way around the battle a whole lot more. It will take a little bit of getting used to, because I think the bottom is now a little bit more cluttered than I'm used to. Obviously, trying to tell apart like my combat weak auras from my raid frames and party frames as well. So some small adjustments on that, but overall, I like how it turned out, and I'll be tinkering with it a little bit here and there, but I think this is a vast improvement over what I had before. So hopefully you can take some of these tips. I've got all the add-ons linked down in the description below, everything that I used in this. And so hopefully this can help you set up your UI a little bit better. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you next time.